The leather wallet felt heavier than it should have, not because of its weight, but because of what it represented, a decision that could change everything or mean nothing at all. Sarah sat on the worn-out subway bench with trembling hands, her second-hand coat doing little to shield her from the October chill that seemed to seep through her very bones. $2.37. That's what she had left in her purse until Friday, and Friday was still 4 days away. She'd already skipped breakfast for 2 days straight, rationing her meager grocery store budget to make sure her 9-year-old daughter, Emma, had enough to eat. The sight of the black leather wallet lying on the dirty subway floor moments ago had made her heart stop. Not because of hope. She'd learned long ago that hope was a luxury, but because of desperation. Her fingers had been trembling then too, just like now as she'd reached down and picked it up, her mind already calculating. Could she keep it? Would anyone even know? Inside were credit cards, a driver's license belonging to someone named Marcus Chen, and an astonishing amount of cash, $3,000 in crisp, $100 bills. Sarah had never held that much money in her life. Her entire monthly income, from her 2 part-time jobs barely, exceeded $2,000. She'd stared at those bills for what felt like an eternity, watching them blur through tears she hadn't known were falling. Emma needed new winter boots. The landlord had mentioned raising the rent again next month. There was that medical bill from last year that kept going to collection agencies. All of it could be solved by these bills, all of it. But as Sarah sat there, watching the numbers on the subway map blur together, she thought about Emma, her daughter, only 9 years old, already old enough to understand that they didn't have much, yet still generous beyond measure. Last week, Emma had wanted to buy a toy at the dollar store, but instead, she'd insisted on getting a can of soup for the homeless man outside their apartment building. "He looked hungry, Mommy," Emma had said simply, as if kindness wasn't a luxury but a necessity of the human soul. Sarah opened the wallet again and looked at the driver's license. Marcus Chen couldn't have been much older than 35, his expression in the photo confident and composed. But underneath all the wealth that radiated from this simple leather accessory, he was still just a person. Someone who, right now, was probably panicking. Someone whose life had just been turned upside down. She left the subway at the next stop. The address on the driver's license led her to a downtown financial building, all glass and steel and success. Sarah felt out of place the moment she entered the lobby, her worn jeans and faded sweater drawing eyes. She approached the sleek desk where a receptionist barely glanced up. "I need to return something that belongs to Marcus Chen," Sarah said quietly. "I found his wallet." The receptionist's eyes widened slightly, not because of Sarah's kindness, but because of the rarity of it. In a city of millions, people rarely returned anything anymore. Within minutes, Sarah was being escorted to the 42nd floor. Marcus Chen's office was exactly what she expected. Minimalist, expensive, impersonal. He stood when she entered, and she watched as his expression cycled through confusion, recognition, and then something deeper that made her uncomfortable. Shock. "You brought this back," he said quietly, looking at the wallet in her hand as if it were an artifact from another world. "You actually brought it back?" "Yes," Sarah said simply. She didn't explain, didn't justify, didn't need to. He opened it, counted the cash without ceremony, then looked up at her with an intensity that made her want to disappear. Why? It was such a simple question, and yet it contained everything. Sarah shrugged. "Because it's yours. Because I know what it feels like to lose something important." Marcus sat down slowly in his leather chair. "Do you have any idea how many people work in this building? How many of them found that wallet on their way in this morning?" He paused. "I dropped it deliberately. I've done this before several times. I wanted to see how many people would do the right thing when no one was watching. In the last month, I've dropped wallets dozens of times. Not one person brought one back." Sarah felt her stomach drop. This had been a test. She wasn't special. She was just the first one with a conscience desperate, enough to override survival instinct. "Do you know what that tells me?" Marcus continued, his voice cracking slightly. "About our world? About humanity? That good people are becoming extinct." He paused, looking at her more carefully. "But you're here. You brought it back when you're clearly struggling yourself." Before Sarah could respond, Marcus asked her about her life. And something about his genuine curiosity, or perhaps just the relief of speaking her truth to someone who seemed to actually listen, made Sarah tell him everything. About Emma, about the 2 jobs, about the eviction notice she'd received last week, about the calculus of poverty that meant choosing between medications and meals, between heat and food. Marcus listened without interrupting. When she finished, he did something she didn't expect. He got up and walked her to his window, showing her the city sprawling below, millions of people living millions of stories, most of them containing their own version of her struggle. "I built my first company because I was like you," he said softly. "My mother worked 3 jobs to keep my sister and me off the street. I swore that when I made it, I'd never forget what it felt like to have nothing. But I did forget. Everyone in this building has forgotten, including me, until today." 2 weeks later, Sarah received an employment contract at Chen Industries. The position was custom created for her skill set, a role combining administrative work with community outreach. The salary was triple what she made working 2 jobs. There was health insurance, a 401k, and paid time off. But more importantly, there was dignity and the possibility of a future for Emma. On her first day, Marcus took her to a new initiative he'd launched, a scholarship program for children whose parents were working multiple jobs to survive. The first 500 students selected would have their education fully funded through college. Marcus had seeded the program with $50 million. "This is because of you," he told Sarah. "Because you reminded me that the world isn't defined by the test. It's defined by how we treat each other when no one's watching. You passed a test that wasn't yours to take, and in doing so, you changed the trajectory of both our lives." Sarah looked at the photographs of the scholarship. Recipients lining the wall, faces like Emma's, carrying dreams that seemed impossible. She thought about that moment on the subway, when she'd been holding $3,000 that wasn't hers, facing a choice that defined not just that moment, but everything that came after. The power hadn't been in the money. It had been in the choice. It had been in deciding at the moment when it mattered most that she was the kind of person who did the right thing even when doing wrong was so easy. That she was the kind of person who believed in the goodness of strangers because she wanted to live in a world where goodness still existed. And somehow, by making that choice, she had transformed that world from something she imagined into something real.